Hello, everyone. I am here with the time domain processor model 288R. This is Roman's version of this module. I probably have talked about this module's history in the past, but Don made this in the later 70s. Not really sure. I think it's maybe between like 76 and 78. From what I hear, it's like his response to I think it's called like the Marshall time machine. It's kind of micro delay machine rack unit that I hear was used for Darth Vader's voice, which is kind of cool. I guess I would maybe put it, that maybe came out in like 76 if they were that movie came out in 77. And so, yeah, this is probably 77 or later. But yeah, so then, but there are only two prototypes, three maybe, depending on who you ask. Alessandro Cortini has one of them, and it sounds like he uses it on a lot of stuff that he does. And Mark Verbos made a clone of this one. So there's the 288V, as it's referred to out there, which is a pretty. It sounds like he went through a lot of trouble to kind of make it as accurate as possible. And I've played that one at EMS. You probably heard me gush about it if you've been listening to the show for a while, when I went to EMS a year and a half ago. And yeah, really loved that thing. So I was kind of saving up for one of those. And then Roman put out his version of it this year, back in June 2021 is when I got this. So yeah, this is more of a, it was a digital delay, but this is all, done off some sort of a computer chip in the back here, and I'll show the back of it in a bit. But yeah, kind of expands on some of its limitations, because the original one was like very noisy. At different settings, you're basically at like a 50% noise ratio to the actual signal that you're putting into it, that you're getting at the output. So this is a lot cleaner, and also you're much shorter delay times on the original, and this one gives you options to keep kind of within the same realm of the delay times of the original, or expand those by like 10 or so. So yeah, let's kind of get into what this module looks like. I really dig the look of this thing. It kind of has to me, it's like a circular. There's 8 sections with kind of 7 different sections circling the main center section, which is the most eye-catching in my opinion, which is like the mixer output section, which has 9 sliders and switches that basically let you, when using this kind of for delay, bring in different taps of the delay. So you have your original signal at 0 that you can mix in, as well as then 8 different taps out of that. If you know the signal delay unit model 77 that came before this, if you're watching the video, you can kind of see it to the right here, or like 3/4 of it. But I went in depth on that module back when we had more on the show last year. But that's like a 4-tap delay. So you get a 1/4 tap, half tap, 3/4 tap, and a full tap out. So obviously this kind of doubles that. But you're able to kind of in real time mix those in and out. And there's also you can invert the phase of those taps too, which I'll kind of show in a little bit. So kind of starting, I guess, at the bottom left-hand corner is a mixer input. It's 3 signal inputs with knobs in there. So that's where you can put in 3 different signals, or however many you want to. You might want to leave space, maybe leave 1 or 2 open, because you can, create feedback loops, or more repeats. Like if you're kind of coming from a world of, delay pedals, if you want to get usually kind of with delay pedals, you're going to get a time, a amount of repeats, and then like a mix. And so this this is a bit of the mix, but also this is by feeding taps from the top section back out or back into the input. That's where you're upping your amount of repeats, because you're creating a feedback loop. So you've got your 3-input mixer down the bottom left. Then to the right of that, you have another where it just says signal in, which is basically like a modulation section, an audio one, just kind of like an FM type of input. You then have a CV attenuverter, and then you have the time or pitch multiplier, as it's here. There's a switch for time and pitch, which we'll get into in a little bit. But basically, your general time of the delay. You also have a 1x and 1x and 2x. You can kind of double the length through the switch as two settings. Let's see. Above that, we have our output section, which has a mixed output, which is basically anything that you have up on the within the mix output mixer. Basically, the sliders and switches that you have selected will come out of that output. You also have these preset sum outputs. There's 4 of them, A, B, C, and D, and I'll get into those later. Up above that, we have this section where it kind of connects to the section to the left of that, which is your individual tiny jack tap outs. I think I'll kind of get into this a little bit later, but basically your tap outs it goes from 0, which is like your input. You're just going to find out of this 0 output as well. And then it goes in 20 millisecond increments, so 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, 120, 140, 160. With the back panel, I'll show later, with this top right hand section, you can, with dip switches on the back, change the millisecond relations. And so instead of having this, everything go by 20, you can adjust it by 10-second increments. So instead of the 21, you could have it be a 10 instead, and the 40 could be a 50 instead. Basically, there's 16 dip switches for each preset calibration, A, B, C, and whichever ones you select, you'll then kind of it will adjust the timing of those. That kind of already goes over the top output sections. Their main function, or I tend to use it for the main function, is taking those out and running them back into one of the inputs on the mixer to start creating some more feedback repeats. And then we're going to go over to the now back to the left-hand side of the module, and these two kind of sections deal with the looper, is what we'll call it. There's nothing that it doesn't say a looper. I don't know if looping was an actual thing, or like a term used amongst musicians and instrument makers and things like that. So basically, they kind of they call it like recirculate is kind of what he's aiming for. Basically, taking some audio and recirculating it, playing it back over and over again. So you have this bottom control section. Has how you want to set up to grab that audio. It has a internal like envelope follower, kind of sensor that is attached to the first A input on the input mixer. And so once you hit a threshold, depending on how you have this set up, the buffer will restart to record for its maximum length. and then you have options on on basically repeating that. Then above that you kind of have these 2 pulse inputs and 2 pulse outputs and your cycle sections, and this is where you can kind of manually tell it to grab some audio and then start playing it back. And there's not a lot of control over like your audio buffer time. You just have a 3-way switch that says full cycle in the middle. Doesn't really have anything. It's basically like a medium cycle, and then left it does say short cycle. There's pulse outputs for when the like basically when your right section, which is like whatever you're putting into it, will output a pulse, and then there's a end of cycle section for the recirculate. So once it goes through its buffer, it will then put an output pulse there. You then have 2 more pulse inputs for the write and recirculate to kind of tell it with pulses when to grab more audio and then when to stop it and start playing it back. Whew, it's a big one. I call this like the Marf of delays because there's a lot you can do with this. So let's start hearing some stuff now that I've blabbed on about it for like 10 plus minutes. So I guess what I really like about this thing, maybe compared to like the 277 signal delay unit, is you can put an input out and then you have your 4 different tap outputs that you're going to eventually put into your mixer and hear that. So you're just hearing that delayed signal. You don't hear the original signal. So most likely a lot of, or all the oscillators have multiple outputs, and with like the 292 or whatever kind of Buchla low pass gate you're using, you have multiple outputs of that. So ideally you route the direct signal into the mixer, and then you direct another signal into the input mixer of the delay unit, and so then you take that output, so you have your original sound that you're delaying it against, so you get those, you hear both sections of that. What's cool about this, so instead of taking like 2 spots on your mixer, this can take 1, because you can hear your output through this 0 tap, which is kind of nice. So you just have 1 section of your mixer that you're taking up with this. So yeah, I got this little sequence going. So these switches on the output mixer, when they're in it's a 3-way switch. When they're in the middle position, they are muted. So I turned this one positive, so I turned it up, turned up the actual slider, and we can hear it. You can attenuate it. So now it's muted, and then if you go down, it is it flips the phase of it. So you could, and I'll kind of show this later, you could still run your another signal of this, like out of the 292 into your mixer and kind of have it be out of phase with this. So I'm going to flip up all the switches on these 8 sliders, and you can start bringing in these taps. So I'm just going to bring in I'll bring them all up just so you can kind of get a general sense. You're going to get a general sense of how short this delay is. So this is at like straight up on the time multiplier dial, and so there's obviously you can hear yes, there's some sort of delay going on there, but it's not very long. I'm going to go all the way up on this, and we're kind of overloading the mixer. I probably have this up too high, but that's all 8 taps kind of going at the same time. Very short kind of micro delay type of thing, almost more kind of in chorus delay time. We can switch this now to the 2x, which will extend it a bit, as you can hear there. And I'll go all the way up. You can kind of get a better sense now of those 8 individual taps. And really you're hearing the 9 taps because you're hearing the original signal along with that too. So 8 can kind of be a bit much. So what's cool about this is you can start muting different or bringing down the mix of different taps to get different rhythms. So I've brought down the 1, 4, 6, and 7 taps, leaving up 2, 3, 5, and 8, and you have a bit more space in between those kind of delay taps. So let me bring down all of them. Let me just go with I'll just do even, so 2, 4, 6, and 8. Maybe I'll mix 3 up about halfway just to... And that kind of changes things a bit. I'll bring up 5 and 7 a bit more. A little much, so maybe let me try bringing down 4 and 6. Bring 5 all the way up. I'm gonna maybe just put up, let's see, maybe 2. I got now the 0 tap, 2, 3, 4, and 8. We can do other things like maybe I'm gonna make a shape. So the 0 tap is all the way up, but then 1 is at its lowest, and I'm going to gradually, kind of incrementally bring those all the way up to where 8 is at its fullest. So you can hear the delay taps kind of ramp louder as they go, which is kind of opposite what you'd think of like a regular delay function being, as the delay taps will get quieter as they go. I can invert that to get the more traditional kind of first delay taps are louder and it gets quieter. So yeah, it's cool with all those taps. You're getting those repeats, and those are kind of built into this machine. You're not even using any feedback yet. So what I'm going to now do is out of the 160 millisecond, and that's now based off of the time multiplier too, so that's kind of changing that. But basically the 8 tap out up at the top of its tiny jack section, I'm putting back into the input mixer. So I'm going to go back with that 2, 4, 6, and 8 up. And then I can bring up the input mixer, and you can hear those delays feeding back. I'll kind of maybe bring these down a little bit. Maybe I'm going to bring 2 and 6 down to about halfway, so 4 and 8 are still up all the way. What we could do is maybe use like an odd tap out. Let's try going to maybe 100 milliseconds, so that's kind of like the tap out number 5, and I'll kind of mess with the so now I just have the 0, 2 is up most of the way, and 6 is up most of the way. We can try doing 2, so I can maybe go with like the 20 millisecond. So I'm gonna, because I have 2 mixer input sections right here, I'm gonna put in the 1 tap too. So actually, I just turned down all the taps, so I just have the 0 main signal input going through, and I'm just feeding back that 1 and 5 millisecond taps. So I have none of the other sliders up. I'm just adjusting those for feedback. I can bring up like let's see, let me bring up the 7 tap and maybe the 3 taps. I'll bring this, take those out. So yeah, that's kind of the main function of the delay section without its extended delays. So, pretty short stuff. I'll go into in a bit. I'll pop this out and turn on the dip switch that extend those delays, so you can kind of hear that too. But let's go now. Let's switch over to this kind of looper section. So in my memory and kind of when I've looked back at the verbose one, these are acting a bit differently than the Roman version is acting different than the verbose one, which I would assume also is acting different from the original. And it's almost as if he's kind of split up the delay and the looping into 2 different sections. We have this this 3-way switch in the middle that is so you can put into all sounds. There's also arm pulse and next sound. So when it's in all sounds, you kind of are in, from what I can tell, is like the delay section, like everything that we just kind of did there. And then if you want to go over to the the looping section, you switch this switch in the middle. Then you'll see a right LED, WRITE, that will light up in the top left section. And let me just, here, I'll just kind of turn these things up again. So that's what we had before, right? And then when I switch it over, it does really kind of funky aliasing things when you change some of the time switches and things. I kind of dig it. But you can hear the delay time got really short. So yeah, I'd like to talk to Rowan about this and kind of see what's going on, but it kind of has a set delay time now. Like if I change the time multiplier, nothing happens. So where in my memory it's like it didn't, if for the verbose one, you didn't kind of have to do this. The looper section was always kind of ready to grab whatever you were doing with whatever delay time you had. But this is kind of setting it to be like, no, it's this certain delay time. So I guess the first thing to maybe show, there's kind of a few different ways to grab this audio that's going on. So right now what I'll do is I'll put I'm patching a pulse output from my 218 on the music easel into this next sound section. Or actually, before I do that, I'm going to go through the sensor section first. So this sensor knob is attached to this first input, and you kind of engage it by turning it up, and you'll see this auto control light flash now. It's flashing in time with the audio that's coming through. I'm going to open up the VCA a bit to let more sound in. But you kind of like get it going. The buffer starts filling up, and if you're looking at this video right now, and maybe kind of if you hear it every once in a while, the buffer fills up and it flips over to where it's going to start playing the sounds that you've then recorded. It's going to start looping. But I have the sensor up so loud that when it kind of trips the sensor again, it goes back to its right section. So I'm going to back off a little bit. There we go. And so we now have a looping section along with what's playing and from my direct input. So I'm going to turn my direct input down. So now we're just hearing what we just kind of recorded in our looping section. This is the full cycle of it. Obviously, like very, very short. to probably what you're used to with different looping pedals and things like that. So if I flip now to the middle section, this is like the kind of half loop, and then I'm going to go to the short section. So that's a very short piece of audio that it grabbed. What I really like about this section, though, and it's fun to work with, I've found it pretty easy to jam with, even though you have these short passages that it grabs from, you get this pulse output out of the end of cycle section, and I like then kind of driving maybe like another sequencer with that, so you kind of have you can make this be a backbone audio section and then drive other things in your system off of this rhythm that it's putting out. So I'm going to put this into another section of the Marf. It's got another like four note sequence, and I'll bring this up on the mixer. It's this other side of the Marf is pulling from the same notes that or family of notes that this original sequence was using, so it's in tune with this, which is kind of cool. So that's pretty musical on its own, in my mind. You can then switch it to that middle, and so Steph kind of we've shortened that timing, so it's going to go faster through its cycle. And we'll go to the short cycle. So yeah, where that kind of original thing was very percussive, and you can hear kind of how quickly it's cycling through its end of cycle. We can also then bring in our original signal again. Now it's not going to be, I guess I could then take this and go and kind of also clock it at the same rate, so I could do, but maybe I can just take its rhythmic stuff out. So yeah, I find that pretty fun to jam with. What I haven't even got into is now we can kind of go back over to the time multiplier section. And so we recorded this at this 1.0 mark on our time multiplier knob, which is basically straight up and down. So now if we turn it up, the pitch of it goes up, and it runs faster as well. And we can go down. And we can switch our cycle again. That's that medium cycle. Here's that short cycle too. So if you just wanted some kind of percussive hit, I find that kind of, when I'm just jamming on this, I'll check all three different sections, and maybe find inspiration from these kind of shorter percussive hits when it's on the short cycle, and build from that. And actually, so the output mixer sliders, that's kind of where, if you turn them all down, that's what's affecting your output at this point when you have a loop. It's these sliders. So depending on which ones you have up and stuff, you can kind of shape its timbre a bit and volume. Kind of funky. Okay, so that's like the auto sensor. So now I can turn this back on. Turn up some audio again. We just grabbed another section again. It's going to be pretty similar because it's, you know, the same sequence and everything. Different on its short cycle, kind of a more defined hit for kind of percussive stuff. Okay, so now let me show you. So that's one way to grab audio. And another thing you can do is you can patch into this next sound arm pulse kind of orange pulse input jack. And let me turn this back up. And so now if I tap on my 218, it's going to go back into the right section. And it's going to basically restart the buffer and start recording again. So you can kind of just on demand, when you want to reset it, patch into this section, send it a pulse, and then it'll grab that. You can then also patch two different pulses into this write and recirculate section, and kind of have, I guess what I could do, I can try and grab even maybe shorter sections of audio with this. Let me try and get this patched up real quick. So what I could do, I'm going to patch into the sample and hold section of the 266, and so the pulse input has two, after you put a pulse into it, it has two alternating pulse outs. And so what I can kind of do with this is basically every other tap on the 218 is going to send it to write, and then when I hit it again, it's going to go to recirculate. So right now I have it at write, so nothing's happening. And I'm going to give it two quick taps. Or actually, let me... So now every other time, and it's easier to see it when when you're actually looking at this video, but every time I tap it, it goes back and forth. You know, another thing you can do is you could set up maybe different pulses from like your sequencer to like basically have it, you know, on, you can either program it like if you've got the MARF, or if you've got, say your like 245 or 246, you can designate different pulse outputs to go into the right and recirculate, and it'll just kind of capture audio during those sections. So yeah, that's kind of the basic overview for that. Before I kind of pop this thing out, I'm going to go into the longer timings and the different outputs. One cool thing I've found, and I haven't really talked about this, is the pitch section that you can switch to on the bottom right-hand corner. And this, gosh, I going back and trying to do all the research, and I didn't really I didn't really quite understand it when I had access to the verbose version. But from what I can tell is when you turn that over, it shortens the delay time, but it runs a down ramp like oscillator. I think it's an LFO. It kind of like self-modulates the timing of this, and in a way, it kind of gives like I'll have you hear it, but it kind of gives like and let me turn. I'm just gonna have a static sound up. So put one tap up. So I've got the 0 and the 4 tap up. So I'm in the time section at the 1x, and I'm switching over to pitch, and I'll bring up maybe some more sliders. Move this around. It's really kind of subtle, but what I've found, I'm kind of turning this time multiplier around. You're not hearing too much of a difference, but what I have kind of found is it's the coolest setting that I found. Also takes into account the phase switches. So I'm going to run this same oscillator into another channel of my mixer. Sorry, that was kind of loud. And then I'm going to run the 0 tap output, but I'm going to run it out of phase with this thing. I'm actually going to turn down all the taps here. And so I'm going to turn these both up. And now on the mixer, both of these are up, and they're both in mono, so they basically cancel each other out. If I take out the main signal, you can hear that get loud again. But yeah, like right there, it's where even kind of almost canceled out. So that's the point that I want it to get to. And then when I add other sliders, so I'm adding the first slider up, get this really kind of cool out of phased flange type of sounds. And I, compare it to where I'm going to switch over to time, and we kind of lose that kind of hollowed out, warbled out effect. I can then add, more sliders up, and it kind of affects the timbre of it. So I see this more of like a tone timbre shaping type of an effect. Then, now at this point, I do find the pitch knob does have more of effect, and it kind of detunes things a bit. So I've turned it up to I'll turn it up all the way. And you kind of hear more dissonant warble drift between the signals. And I'll go to 0.6, and it's quite a bit tighter. And you'll hear this in the background, this kind of tick every 2 seconds or so. And I think it's maybe this LFO down ramp that's happening. You're hearing the peak of it right there. So yeah, this is a cool thing that I've found when using this kind of function. I don't know if in this version compared to the other version is really if they're having the same effect. I would love to have the other version here as well, and kind of play with them side by side to try and figure out what is maybe happening on this version compared to the other. Okay, so I am going to pause for a second and pop this thing out and turn up the delay timing to kind of show you the longer delay time and what you can do with these preset sections. Okay, now what you're seeing amidst all this pink bubble wrap is the back of the time domain processor. What is really cool that Roman has done with this is, compared to the original and the verbose version, if you remember, I kind of talked about the these preset sections. For the main outputs, there's 4 extra ABCD outputs, and there's also preset settings to shift the time. We're going to call it calibration, your individual tap calibration. That was all in the original module and everything, but you had to literally connect. You had to wire up this preset, put all these different If you look at like the back of the original or back of the Verbis one, there's just tons of wires everywhere. Because I'm guessing you're just, you're connecting wires to putting in different resistors and things like that to set these presets. And so that's a lot of effort, to have this thing that, you can always kind of go back to, but if you're going to want to change that at some point, that's an ordeal. So what Roman has done is all that kind of functionality has been put into a series of dip switches and little mini trim pots. So on this left-hand section, there's 4 different sections that represent the A, B, and CD preset output stages, basically. And what each section does is mimic your main output mixer section, the 9 individual sliders and phase switches as well. So you'll have 0, 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, 120, 140, and 160 mini trim pots in preset A. And so you can basically, by dialing those up, it's as if you're setting the slider at a certain position. And then you have another set of dip switches that if you have them up, it's going to be set to the positive section. If you have them down, they're going to be out of phase. So there's no mute switch, but basically if you want a tap to be muted, you would just turn that trim pot all the way down, and you're not going to get an output for that section. So you can do that 4 times over for each of the different outputs. Kind of moving over. So I guess in how I want to utilize this, I really like stereo delays and kind of ping pong delays, delay taps bouncing back and forth, which was really easy to do with the signal delay unit. I mean, you can the 277. You can do that with like the individual tap outs up top, but the main kind of mixed output with all the different sliders, that's just mono out. So there's just one signal coming out of that. So what I saw that you can do with these presets is kind of set the 2 pairs, A and B, and then C and D, as different stereo output options. So what I've done is for A and B, I've turned the first kind of 0 tap, your main input signal, up all the way on both of those. And then I've gone back and forth, thinking of it as A is your left output and B is your right output. And I've gone and kind of ping-ponged back and forth. So the next, the preset B, the second trim pot is turned all the way up, where on A, it's turned all the way down. And then the next one, I have A turned all the way up and B all the way down, and so on throughout. So you're going to get 8 taps, but they're going to go, bounce left and right. Then for C and D, what I've done is basically not utilized all the taps. So I'm having both the same 0 main input tap up, but then I'm putting the first tap, I believe it's on the 4th section on preset D, and then the last tap output on preset C. So you're only going to get, one left and right. You're going to get your main signal first, like if you're doing kind of like a percussive 1-hit type of thing, and then you hear 1 repeat on the right and 1 on the left, and that's it. I'll show you why I did that in a bit. Now we have the calibration settings for the 3 presets for the individual kind of tap outputs. And so because you're kind of locked into these presets with the outputs, I saw kind of an opportunity to use these different ones to, shift these kind of calibration presets around just for more variety, because you're set here, you're not really able to use the mixer panel which is like the fun part of this thing in my mind. But I wanted that stereo. So this is kind of a compromise. Like, well, okay, if I'm just stuck in this stereo, I'm not, I'll show you how I do kind of utilize it, which is still pretty cool. But this is just another option to kind of shift things around, which will kind of make more sense when I have stuff on. But yeah, so basically what you do is there's 16 individual little dip switches, and the first 8 that you turn up into the positive will then see themselves at the 8 individual outputs, and they go 10 through 160. So I've just kind of done a few different patterns. Like one is maybe the first 2 are off, and then the next 2, 30, 40 are on, then 2 off, and then the next 2 are on, and kind of go back and forth there. And yeah, just done different things to try and mix it up. So yeah, that's kind of an explanation on the back. Oh, what I've also done is there's this bottom right hand, another set of dip switches, and these are kind of the extra modifications that Roman's kind of put in here to extend the playability of this thing. So the first one extends the delay and loop time, I think, by 10. So you're going to hear a lot longer delay times. Then there's one that will, I think the second one, it basically will it'll reduce the amount of high-end frequency that will come output out of this to like maybe 11, maybe, I forget. Yeah, maybe it's like 11,000 hertz. I forget. Sorry. I'll probably have botched that. And then the 3 and 4 different combinations of that will reduce the bit rate. I think one combination will be 12, one will be 8, 4, and I think maybe it stops at 4, but yeah, there's like 3 or 4 different things that it'll turn down the bit rate. I've kind of left it all clean. I've messed with those, and it gives a bit of a crunch and character to it, which what it was great about the original one, or the verbose section, but or verbose module. But yeah, I've just found I'm liking the kind of cleaner aesthetic with this one. So yeah, I'm gonna then now kind of switch this over and pop this in. Okay, we're plugged back in, and I have the A and B preset outputs in the summed output section patched into my 207 mixer, and I have each one panned hard left and right, so you can kind of hear this stereo-ness of this setting. So I'm just going to do one hit. So I've extended the delay time as I've showed you, but we're still on the shorter end. We've got the 1x section with the knob straight up, and it's still very short on this section. It really doesn't get very long until you flip over to the 2x, but I'll give you a couple examples. So that's 8 taps going, and I can turn that one all the way up, but still in the 1x section. Hear more of those individual taps. Now I'm gonna switch over to the 2x, and I'll go straight up. So now you can hear those individual taps much better, and they're much cleaner. So I'll play it again. So if you remember, I have the 0 tap out, so that's going to go to both kind of, the first hit is going to go out of both of the taps, or both of the outputs, and then it's going to go back and forth, right to left. There you go. I can crank this up all the way. So this is like the longest delay time that you can get. So yeah, there you go. I'll turn this sequence on so you can kind of how cool it can sound with 8 taps going. There you go. Stop that. So, there's a lot going on. I don't have any, feedback patch in there. So, those are just like the 8 taps that are going. I guess before I show you, or no, I'll do it now. So now that we're in this kind of stereo mode and these sliders don't really have much effect, when I want to do feedback, what I found, instead of, patching into the individual tap outputs, like if I want the 8 tap output to be the main feedback source to run back into the input mixer, what I found is even cooler is if I use the mixed output that we're now not using because we're using our preset stereo outputs. I run that back into the input mixer. Now I can go back to using the sliders and switch things out of phase if I want to, and tap or patch my feedback in this way. So this is gonna be quite a bit of a garbled mess because we've already have the 8 taps going on, and now we're gonna introduce more. So let's just hear what we're gonna get into. So I'll turn up like the 8 tap all the way. So you can kind of hear that feedback's influence, and those taps just kind of keep on going and shimmering throughout, which is really, pretty cool. Let me try turning on maybe like the 3rd tap as well. A lot going on. Let me try the 4th as well. And this is kind of the point. I kind of like the. Turn this off for a second. So I've stopped it. You can hear now those feedbacks going. I can really crank the mixer to grab those and really start to feed them back. Pull down the mix a bit. Oh yeah, trying to grab onto it by switching in other things, but I feel like with the knob about 3/4 of the way up is where I tend to find its like sweet spot, where I can with the tap sliders all the way up, I can get basically 2 tap sliders at their full volume, and it won't kind of feedback uncontrollably. When I start to push up more than that, I'll then want to back down on the input mixer, but then it's usually just kind of chaos anyways, but that might be what you want. So to back up for a second, we're going to kind of now go up to this calibration setting. So if I'm not using the feedback section to kind of extend those repeats or kind of change the rhythm of it a bit, we're going to try using these different presets that I've selected here, these A, B, and C sections that bump the millisecond sections around. So we're back on with our sequence. So we're in the regular calibrated section where it's 0 through 160 in 20 millisecond sections. So I'm going to switch over to preset. And I have it to set to A now. And we can definitely hear that it's changed. Like, it kind of also, it feels like it has like a swing to it, like it swings to the right ear in my head. I don't know if it's doing the same for you. Obviously, like, changing the time multiplier was gonna affect this a bit too. Probably hard to find like the exact spot where it's gonna work musically, where I do have it kind of set at this 0.8 section with the regular calibration. which I've switched back to now, and it's a pleasing rhythm where we're at too. So okay, so now I'm going to go back to the preset. So this is A. Now I'm going to go to B. This one's weird. Now we're up to C. This one's cool. So yeah, just different options. Really quick, kind of 2 switches away, and can kind of change up the whole feel of this delay pattern. But you can quickly go back to the way you had it, going back to the calibrated section. Okay, so now I'm going to stop that for a second, and I'm going to switch the outputs to the C and D. So if you remember, I only turned up 2 of the dip switches on this one. So in theory, we should get the initial, 0 output, and then it's going to go, I think on the 4th tap, it's going to come out of the D output, and the 8th tap, it's going to come out of the C output. So it's still going to be a stereo ping pong thing, but, not 8 taps, basically 2 taps. So here we go. And actually, here, I'm going to stop this. I'm just going to go 1 hit at a time so you can hear the... So there we go. You got your initial hit, then right, and then left. So now starting that back up, you get a more sense of space, like the other between your taps, right? Like still a cool rhythm, but you're not kind of just bombarded with those 8 taps, because we kind of can't get away from those when you're in this preset section. There's just a lot going on. But this is where I find using the mixed output and going back and playing with the sliders and switches on the output mixer section leaves more for that room for that feedback to do cool stuff. So I'm gonna just try. Let's try like 2. That's pretty cool by itself. Let's try 2 and 3. So already we're kind of getting back to that same feel of like having like the 8 taps in my mind. A lot of cool shimmery stuff going on. I'm gonna bring both those out, and I just sat here for hours, kind of, sitting with a sequence like this, and then just like, well, let's hear what the 5th tap up sounds like, and just doing different combinations. So, in fact, I just have turned up the 5th output. Let's try turning up like the 1st output too. And then, just finding different mixes. So maybe I want to turn the 1 tap up all the way, and I'll go to like half with the 5th tap. And then let's see what happens if I turn up the 6th one to like 3/4. I'll add the 4th tap as well. And if the feedback kind of maybe goes on for too long that you want, you can just back up on that input mixer, or you mix the different taps lower too. We can also then mess with the preset section just to see what that gives us too. So I'm going to flip it back over to preset A. You feel a little bit of a difference there. This isn't going to be as effective because we only have those 2 taps, so it's not really switching these things around very much. I'm going to just switch it to B. just see. Yeah, it kind of definitely kind of changed things. But then you still have your different taps that you can play with too, and the timing. So very jammable. Very, very fun in my mind. Get into high feedback points. Yeah, so there you go. I'm not going to get back into the looper section in this longer setting. Just know that, yeah, basically, when it was maybe about 5 seconds on its full cycle to go through, on its lower settings, the buffer is now 25 seconds, I think, on its full cycle. I guess I'm going to refer back to the thing we mentioned last month where I did the time domain processor summit with Todd Barton and Adam Scramstad. And Todd really had mapped all that out, and he did a really great patch, kind of mixing the 216 touch plate with all its different pulse outputs. He was kind of showing you all 3 different ways by pulsing into the next sound or the right and recirculate, kind of all different ways to control that, and it was really cool. So he did it much better than I'm going to do it today. So go to his YouTube page. It's going to be kind of mid-June that he posted that, and take a look at that. I also kind of do go into more of the preset stuff, just what I showed you. This is me updating it since then, kind of figuring out that maybe less taps in the stereo summed output section is better when I want to mix some of the output mixer into it. So yeah, well, thanks for sticking around with me on this one, and hope this was some insight into this thing that not many people have played with, and yet this is a different kind of incarnation. It's definitely like a I'm trying to think of the word. It's definitely not a recreation. It's a a module inspired by the originals is what I'd say, kind of in its current state. But super fun nonetheless.